Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another video. The Los Angeles Clippers just got knocked out by the Phoenix Suns, just 2 wins away from making their first ever NBA Finals. Given they did make a historic run for the franchise, making their first ever Western Conference Finals and winning their first 2 ever Western Conference Finals games in this season. It was a weird up and down playoff run for them this season. They were a team that for the past 2 years, ever since they got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, have been considered one of, if not oftentimes the team to beat in the Western Conference alongside the Los Angeles Lakers. And last year, they just fell apart in the second round to the Denver Nuggets, blowing a 3-1 lead. And this year, it kind of looked like it was going to be a little more of the same, where they just folded under pressure when they went down 0-2 to the Dallas Mavericks in the first round, ended up winning that series in 7 games, and then ultimately going down 0-2 to the Utah Jazz in the second round, putting them once again in a hole that they managed to fight their way out of, despite losing Kawhi Leonard about halfway through that series for the season, which is probably the main reason why this Clippers team didn't go as far as they would have liked to. I'm not going to talk about what maybe would have happened if they had Kawhi in this Suns series, because the Suns are a really good team. Having Kawhi doesn't guarantee anything, so I'm not going to make assumptions like if they had Kawhi, they wouldn't have won at all. But I'm sure the Clippers right now are sitting thinking to themselves, if we had Kawhi, who knows what would have happened? Maybe they would right now be on their way to the NBA Finals and be very close to getting the first NBA title in Clippers history. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is what's next for these Clippers. This season is over. It doesn't matter. We can't look at what ifs for this Clippers team. We have to look at what is concrete and going into the future. And there are some what ifs for this offseason, but this is stuff we have to look forward to. No more of looking back at the past. The Clippers, this is the biggest offseason in their franchise history. They just made the best playoff run ever for their franchise. Now, they've got some big decisions to make, as well as one big free agent that will completely decide whether this Clippers team continues to be a contender or falls off, no future, and very little assets to add in new talent. That's Kawhi Leonard. I don't need to tell you how good Kawhi Leonard is. Top 5 player in the league. I don't know why I told you after I said I didn't need to. But Kawhi Leonard is a guy that turns your team and turns this Clippers team from a really good or solid team to a title contender. Paul George is fantastic. He's great. And the Clippers have him locked up until I think he's like 35, 34 years old. So he's here to stay for a while. But if Kawhi Leonard isn't alongside Paul George, as much as Paul George impressed me in these playoffs, and he deserves a lot of credit for it, he himself is not taking these Clippers to a title. And to acquire Paul George and Kawhi Leonard subsequently, they had to give up their entire future to the Thunder. If you can't tell from the many different things around my room and my setup, I'm a Thunder fan, so I know all about how much they gave us. SGA, Gallinari, tons of draft picks. They don't have a future really at this point. Their future right now relies on Kawhi Leonard. If Kawhi leaves, the Clippers are screwed. That's pretty much the way it goes. Maybe they could make some trades with some contracts. Maybe they turn like a Patrick Beverley and like a second round pick or something into something. Maybe they could trade like a Terrence Mann, who showed a lot of value as a young player in these playoffs. Maybe they could turn him into something. But ultimately, no matter what they do, if Kawhi Leonard leaves, unless they bring in a new big name free agent to replace him, and even so, there's really no one on this market that's going to do what Kawhi does, they are going to fall off big time. If Kawhi leaves, I think they're a borderline playoff team at best. They could go ahead and prove me wrong. Maybe Paul George comes out and has an MVP caliber season like he had in OKC right before he left for the Clippers. But at the same time, even if he has that MVP caliber season, the supporting cast around him just isn't that good. Now, there were some guys who really impressed over the course of this run outside of Paul George that could help him if Kawhi Leonard left. We could talk about maybe like a Reggie Jackson, who's probably the biggest name. I already talked about Terrence Mann, but Reggie Jackson is a big free agent for the Clippers this offseason. If you did not know, his contract's up. And the way that he played in these playoffs, Reggie Jackson is going to get a bag from someone. I don't know who it's going to be, but I would not be surprised if some team gave him $15 to $20 million. That might sound like a lot, but he played really, really well. He is 31 years old, so I think it would be more towards that 15 side, but Reggie Jackson is going to go out there and get a contract, because right now is the best chance for him to get paid. So the Clippers have a choice. Do they pay Reggie Jackson, or do they let him walk and let maybe like a Terrence Mann step up and try to play the role that Reggie Jackson did a lot in these playoffs? Because Rajon Rondo is not going to do it. Rondo, for all the credit to him for all the great playoff performances that he's had, he is declining. There are a lot of times in this series, in fact, most of the playoffs, Rondo just didn't play. Rondo he's been a great player for a long time. He has that playoff Rondo reputation, but he's just not the player he used to be. And he can't be the starting point guard for this team, Kawhi Leonard or not, going forward. So maybe that's Terrence Mann, or maybe they re-sign Reggie Jackson. Nick Batum is another guy that's going to demand some money. Not probably as much as Reggie Jackson, because Batum is 32 and he's more of like a solid role player, but Batum showed a lot of value. Batum is a guy that I think could get like a mid-level exception from some team, probably a contender, looking to add a 3-and-D guy to their roster. Batum this season played small forward, power forward, center. He did whatever the Clippers needed him to do. And he showed that despite being way overpaid in Charlotte, he's still a decent player. And he's a guy that really any contender could use. So he's another guy they're going to have to think about paying. They already have a ton of money locked up in Luke Kennard, Marcus Morris, and Paul George, alongside Patrick Beverley, who's making $14 million. Serge Ibaka, one of their biggest free agent acquisitions recently, he ended up being lost for the season with an injury right before the playoffs happened. So Serge Ibaka, I don't know if he's going to be back or not. He has a $9.7 million player option, and I think him and his agent will probably just gauge and see if anyone will pay him that much. But if not, then I'm sure that Serge Ibaka is going to pick that up, and he'll be back on the Clippers. He can still be a solid piece for them. Zubac locked up. DeMarcus Cousins is a guy they're going to have to think about bringing back. He had some solid minutes for them at times, so I wouldn't be surprised if they bring him back in like a backup role if he's willing to commit to that. But none of that what I talked about matters if Kawhi Leonard leaves. If Kawhi Leonard leaves, they're done. So what are the chances that Kawhi actually does leave? I think they're slim, if I'm being honest. I've said this before in the past, but as a Thunder fan, it would be optimal and it would be really good for the Thunder if Kawhi Leonard left. Because if he leaves, this Clippers team, the draft picks that we have from them become so much more valuable because they don't have a top 5 player anymore and they're no longer a title contender. So those picks have the potential to be lottery picks. Paul George is a guy that I definitely think can fight them out of the lottery, but the West is stacked right now, and I think it's only getting better. Almost every single team is getting better in the West, outside of maybe like the Spurs, and we'll see about the Thunder. But teams are getting better. The Warriors are going to be better. I think the Wolves are on the come up. You've got the Pelicans, who I think are going to be better. There are a lot of really good teams out West. Grizzlies thrown it down in there towards the bottom of the Western Conference playoff picture. The Clippers are going to struggle, basically. So I do think the chances of Kawhi Leonard leaving are slim, but I do think it's possible. Mainly because I don't know what to expect from Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard's a guy that really just doesn't make sense to me a lot of times. When he won it all in Toronto, I thought he was going to stay because, you just won a title. And that Toronto team had a young Pascal Siakam. Kyle Lowry was playing like a stud. Fred VanVleet just showed out. OG Anunoby was on the rise. They had Kawhi Leonard. That team could have been a dynasty in the making. However, he wanted to live in LA, he's from San Diego, and so he wanted to be in this area. And that's part of why I think he's going to stay. And also, I think the Clippers showed that they can win when Kawhi Leonard's not on the court. They beat the Jazz without Kawhi Leonard at the end of that series. They took 2 games off of the now Western Conference champion Phoenix Suns without Kawhi Leonard. They showed that even without Kawhi Leonard, they're still a good team, and I think that's why Kawhi ends up staying, not just because he lives close to home now, and because they're going to pay him an absolute bag, but because they showed him that he can contend here. He's not old by any means, but he is 30. So he's going to decline his player option. I think he ends up re-upping with the Clippers long term. I think he signs maybe like a 4-5-year deal. I don't remember what exactly the most years he can sign is. I think it's 4. So I think he ends up signing like a 4-year, near $200 million deal, whatever his max is, to come back, play for the Clippers, and compete with Paul George for a championship going into next season and the season after. So, in terms of improvement, what can the Clippers do? Obviously, like I said, bringing back Kawhi Leonard, but I think there is also room for improvement as well. Reggie Jackson was good, but part of me feels like that playoff run isn't super sustainable. He's still a good player, but I don't know if the way that he was averaging like 20 a game is sustainable. So, I think they should still go out and get some solid point guard play, and I think they need to get better at the center position. Zubac is good, and if Serge Ibaka is not healthy, they don't have a backup center outside of DeMarcus Cousins. They need to have another guy down there, whether it's a 6-man, someone to take over for Zubac in the starting role, although I think Zubac does a good job in that starting role. I don't think they need to go out and get anything like massive, but I think looking for maybe like a backup center could work out. Maybe they bring in like a Mike Muscala from the Thunder who played for them a while ago. Maybe they bring him back, be a stretch big, and kind of work with this Clippers team that likes to shoot the 3-ball a lot. One of the better 3-point shooting teams we've ever seen, if I recall correctly, this season. Maybe they go out and get another guard, like in terms of point guard play. Maybe they set up a sign-in trade with the Pelicans for Alonzo Ball, potentially. Something like that I could see happening. So there are options for this team. I don't think they're going to be a player for any of the big-name free agents outside of Kawhi Leonard. They're not going to bring back like a Chris Paul or anything like that. They're not going to bring in a DeMar DeRozan unless there's some trade with like a Marcus Morris or Patrick Beverley. I think the Clippers, for the most part, are set in stone. Assuming Kawhi Leonard comes back, this is what their roster is going to kind of look like. Obviously with some different pieces, because I don't know how Rondo is going to play that much, and I think guys like Serge Ibaka could leave, Patrick Patterson won't be back, and we'll see if they pay Nick Batum and Reggie Jackson. But for the most part, I think these Clippers are coming back, and I think it would be wise to bring back most of this roster, given a lot of guys are getting old. If I go through the roster, Reggie Jackson's 31, Batum is 32, Luke Kennard only 25, but then you've got Rajon Rondo 35, 31 for Serge, 32 for Beverly, 31 for Marcus Morris, 30 for Kawhi Leonard, and 31 for Paul George. That's a lot of guys on the wrong side of 30, and while Paul George, Kawhi Leonard are like star caliber guys, they're going to be good for a while. They're not going to decline anytime soon. I could see guys like a Marcus Morris or maybe like a Serge Ibaka, and we've already seen Patrick Beverley start to decline, but I could see those other guys decline as well. So they've got to make sure to bring in young pieces and find ways to keep this team kind of young, not declining too much, also while adding to their current identity. Tyronn Lue proved to me that he's a really good coach in these playoffs. I will stand by that. So I'm 100% sure that he's coming back, despite them falling short of the finals. Not his fault at all. It was partially his fault alongside with Paul George and the play of those role players. That's why they were in the position that they were. Tyronn Lue made some great adjustments, and I think that he proved that he was the right decision at head coach, not Doc Rivers. So those are my thoughts on the Clippers right now. Like I said, I think it's their entire future depends on this Kawhi Leonard free agency. If he leaves, they're screwed. If he stays, they're a title contender. They are two very opposite sides of the spectrum for this team. We'll see what happens. If Kawhi Leonard leaves, I think he goes to like a Miami or like a New York, but I think he's staying. That's my decision. So I appreciate you guys watching this video. Let me know what you think about the Clippers' future. Let me know what you think about everything that they have coming up. What should they do? Should they pay Reggie Jackson? Should they try and make a move with Patrick Beverley's big contract? Because that's a lot of money for the way Patrick Beverley played. Plus, he shoves people, which isn't very nice. So maybe they should ship him off somewhere else. Is there a star you think they could end up getting? Let me know all that in the comment section below. I will see you guys later. Real ones.